welcome to the Soft Rebellion podcast, a homecoming to the creative power of your female body. Our world uproots us from the gifts of the feminine, the intuitive, the instinctual, the cyclical, the soft. What's the result? Patriarchal cultures of perfectionism, shame, and disconnect that leave us constantly running, never arriving. Imagine a world of women softly rebelling, claiming our cyclicity, our weirdness, and our rest as we each courageously cultivate a deep and delicious relationship to our female bodies. My name is Flurina. I'm an osteopath, dancer, writer, and coach. I've been on my own journey sparked by an eating disorder to come home to the wild, poetic anatomy of my female body and awaken my creative power. And I invite you to join me and my guests, trailblazing teachers, healers, and creatives as we each reclaim our own soft rebellion. Hey, and welcome back to the podcast, and thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so glad that you are here. Welcome, welcome, welcome in the space of the soft rebellion. Yes, our bodies are cyclical, and each month we experience an expansive phase and a phase of retrieving back home, an inhale phase and an exhale phase. And to be very honest, I dismissed that second half of my cycle for so many years. The phase of retrieving, softly contracting, exhaling. I neglected all desires to rest, to take a break, and to harvest the gifts of my break. I kept doing and running, literally always chasing. And I feel I very much joined our common societal tendency of being what I call an inhale society, a society which values and honors everything to do with taking a big breath in, with run, with expand, with do, with show, with present, with perform. And yes, I guess on some level or on a big level, I was still quite successful, but not very fulfilled. And the more I wondered, how can I be successful and fulfilled, the more rest and breaks were calling me home. I remember that one moment where I felt I just had reached something which I really wanted to achieve, a big success in inverted commas, and I felt so empty and desperate in some levels, and really tapping into the depressed voice in my body. My body started screaming, and my body said, I need a break, and the break needs you. And that was a big game changer to notice it's not just me who needs the break, but the break needs me, because the break probably has exactly to reveal something to me. And yeah, I feel to share with you today an experience which for me is the answer to this question, how we can be successful and fulfilled. I did my first big bleed. Yes, I know. I talk so much about menstrual cycle awareness, and I've read a lot about it, and I know about it, and I'm on the path just like you. I've actually just done my first big bleed, which really means to lean into the surrender and the rest and the break which our inner winter, the phase of menstruation, offers and gifts us. And I would love to share with you today the gifts I harvested in that time, and also the challenges I met. And the only thing I fully surrendered. I didn't do anything. The only thing I did do during my big bleed was to jot down some racing thoughts and aha moments in order to share them with you. So this podcast episode is very much me taking back my notebook, opening my diary for you to get an insight, to get an insight, and for me to share my lived experience, what I experienced and what arose in that very moment. And it's interesting, right? Today it's Sunday, 1st of September, and it's pretty much a week since I did my big bleed. I'm now on day 8 of my cycle, so the beginning of my inner spring. And right now, as I record this episode and throughout this morning, I felt this huge challenge, this being pulled in different directions, these shearing forces of, on one level, I still feel the potency of rest, and there is a desire to really may that rest keep floating and nurturing my daily life. And on the other level, I feel my spring, and I feel this huge urge and habit to just run and go and do and just fully forget about any desire to rest and just woo in a toxic, productive way. Tamu Thomas would say, just ray linearly straight forward. And yeah, this is why I record today's episode, to share with you my experience about my big bleed, but also to open the space for all of us to notice this challenge and the tension of noticing, oh yeah, I do need a break, it's so good, but also my old patterns, society, the pace of the world just wants me to run. And I feel what we really have to do, right, is to find that sweet spot, that balance point in between, where we are held within our rest, nurtured to go in the pace of our body. And that's a journey I'm fully on. I am not yet mastering it. And exactly that is the soft rebellion. That is the yes to the soft rebellion, to reclaim our cyclical nature. And that means to reclaim and to emerge into our rest. You might be completely new to menstrual cycle awareness, and you might hear about the inner seasons and the inner winter today for the first time. And if that's the case, I will link some other episodes where I talk with guests much more about what menstrual cycle awareness and what these inner seasons mean. And the previous episode with the wonderful Sophie Jane Hardy, that's also we talked about the inner seasons. You might be in a position where you also often wonder, how can I do both? How can I be successful and fulfilled? You might just come from a big break or even a big bleed and wonder how to maintain a deep sense of rest as you now join the pace of the world. Or you might find yourself so exhausted at this very moment, hearing a small but strong voice calling you home into rest and not quite knowing how to follow that. And wherever you are joining me from today, I'm just so glad and grateful that you're here, and I hope you can take something with you from this episode. And just a few more things I want to name before we dive into my experience of a big bleed. Menstruation and blood and to bleed might have been a taboo for you so far, something to be ashamed of, embarrassed. You might also notice a sense of fear or scariness hearing me talk about big bleed and take a break and rest, and there might be a voice of, I don't have time for a bleed, or what will others think if I take time off during my menstruation, or surely I will fall behind with my agenda and my to-do list and lose momentum if I surrender, if I take a break during my inner winter. I just wanted to name and acknowledge those feelings as well. So, let's dive in. My experience of my first big bleed. And I immediately have to smile and laugh because, it was an adventure. It was such an adventure. I didn't have to travel anywhere, do anything crazy, and it was so adventurous. It was so joyful, and it was so bloody damn hard. You might, if you are following this podcast and following me on social media, you maybe can see or relate that, I had quite a long, extensive summer and spring in the last couple of months, right? Because we always live cycles within cycle. There is my monthly menstrual cycle, but then there is also, for example, the cycle of any project or business we bring into the world. And in the last couple of months, I've worked very hard, softly, rebelliously hard, on this new podcast of Rebellion, on some other projects. I've written a lot, and I did lots of projecting, creating, and bringing into the world, taking the stage, let my hair down, show myself. So I was and went through what felt like a very long and extensive spring and summer. And therefore, I did already, for quite a while, I felt that rising urge for equally a longer exhale phase, a longer autumn and winter, and I felt that soon there comes this point where I have to rest, because, right, yin and yang, in order to go and live in a healthy way, we just need both. I can't be in an extensive summer and spring all the time. And that's why menstrual cycle awareness and our cyclical bodies teach us so much. It's such a gift. Our cycles are such a gift. So around 2 weeks ago, I arrived in my inner autumn, in my pre-menstruum. Luckily, at that time, I was in the mountains with my family, and I could really start to slow down the pace. It was so easy this time to slow down the pace because I was surrounded by pace of nature. The big city world, I'm based in London, felt very far away, and it didn't need lots of commitment to slow down. I felt I have been slowed down naturally, and the holiday mood slowed us all down. It was really lovely place to be for my inner autumn. I haven't been in nature in my inner autumn for a long time. And one thing which was very, very interesting during this pre-menstruum was that I very clearly felt that moment of void, that moment where suddenly just emptiness arises. I could feel how whoops, all my energy just was sucked out of me, right? In inner autumn, we do reach that moment where our energy is on its lowest point in our whole cycle. And sometimes, and the authors of that amazing book, Wild Power, I will all link that in the show notes, they talk about that moment of void where there is just one voice in us saying, I need to go now, I need to go. And it can happen at any point in the premenstruum. And I think in moments where it's not easy to slow down and the pace of the world and what we have to do is still very alive and loud, it can be really hard to actually notice that potent moment of all energy sucking out, and that potent moment where all we have to do is to go, retreat, take yourself back, find your own rest and space. So this premenstruum, I think it was the first time in all my cycles where it was like a crisp, I could literally feel the energy suck out of my body, and there was just one voice: I need to go. We're sitting at the dinner table, we had a lovely dinner, it came towards the end of the dinner, and I just needed to go. And because I was on holiday, I said to my family, I love you and I have to go. I was in a position where I could leave. I think very often we actually can. But we either don't hear that voice or we think, oh, gosh, what will everyone else think? And I didn't justify, I didn't explain. With respect and love, I said, family, I have to leave. And I retreated back up into my little room and curled up, listened to an audiobook, had a hot water bottle despite it being 30 degrees outside, maybe 25 by then, but I really had this desire for a hot water bottle. And I just surrendered to that clear voice of calling me away and home. And oh, sister, it felt so good. It felt like one of the biggest self-love acts I've ever done in my life. It was so authentic and so in a line with a deep desire of my soul, my body, my spirit, of me, of her. And it didn't, did it make sense? Did it not? I didn't have to justify, to understand. I just listened and followed her. And it felt already, that is maybe a miniature big bleed on some levels. It felt so good. So that's my first teaching for teaching, in inverted commas, my first inspiration to you. Yes, do start to slow down in your pre-menstruum. That's softly rebellious, allowing yourself to really turn the gear down and really tap into the pace of your body. And that joyful challenge, can I notice that moment when actually all my energy reaches its lowest point, which is a moment of pure strength and power, not weakness. And can I notice, can I hear this voice, she who says, I need to go. And can I allow myself to go, even if it's just for half an hour, for one night? So yeah, that was a wonderful kind of start into my coming bleed. And I got so excited for a bleed that next morning I was yearning for a bleed. I was yearning to come home to my inner temple. I want to be there much longer. I was yearning for rest. And I was sitting on that bench the other day, looking to the mountain, thinking, actually, this would be the absolute most perfect time for a big bleed. I'm on holiday. We were, at that moment in time, I was in a holiday house with my parents, which is not my parents' home. I'm talking about Switzerland, by the way. And I saw how I could literally just take a train and go back to my parents' place 3 days earlier. We would have all traveled back home together before I flew back to the UK, and just be in that house for myself and use the space and the time for a big bleed. And the moment I started playing with that thought and idea, there was no way back anymore. Every cell of my body was saying, yes, 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 just do it, Flurina, just do it. And I had really, and I feel the joy still now, it felt like being in love. I felt like I was waiting for a first date with that one person, that one man I so admired and adored. I had butterflies. I felt so excited to go home and yes, have a date with my inner winter, meet my inner winter, my menstruation, have a date with myself, fall in love with myself in my inner winter, in my inner temple, during my inner winter. So once I took that decision, there was no way back. And that's what happens. I've packed my suitcase earlier than anyone else, and I went back home. I've arrived, I remember so well, on that Thursday, later afternoon, also quite hot. We were in the mountains, it was also quite hot down in the valley, so to speak. I prepped the garden, I collect all apples which have fallen from the trees together, I collected the leaves together. I've put the hammock up. I made a shopping trip into the village, into town. I bought nice foods. I prepared a cozy bed. I prepared my space to bleed. My sister had some cacao for a cacao ceremony with her, and I asked her if I could take a portion with me. I thought, oh, I'm gonna have a cacao ceremony just for myself. Never done that, just for myself. And then that first evening, now it gets a little bit, you might think poetic, but I think just absolutely beautiful. So that first evening, by then I didn't bleed yet. I was on day 30 of my cycle, and I knew I have pretty much around a 30-day cycle, so I knew that's the blood. The bleed would start any moment. And also because I measure my basal temperature, and that's another inspiration nugget here. When we start to bleed, the temperature drops significantly. So on that morning, there was this big drop. And it's such a gift to measure your temperature. Since I do that and know that, I know the day when my blood comes, when my blood starts to flow. And I knew I'm gonna get my period today. So there is this big sense of being able to welcome, to open your arms for your inner winter, for menstruation, before it had even arrived. So after I had prepared my space the way I wanted this space to be for my big bleed, I lay in the hammock in the evening. I've put all these lovely little candles around the terrace at my parents' place, and I've made a cacao with my sister's cacao. And I was lying in that hammock, and wouldn't you believe, sister, I was lying in that hammock holding the hot cup with cacao, smelling it, sipping it, and just feeling so privileged in that moment and grateful that I had that safe space for me to retrieve. And I was just being with the words, I'm ready. Menstruation, you can come. I'm ready to hear you, to feel you, to see you. And as I was lying in that hammock, drinking hot cacao, I got my menstruation. And yeah, that was a very, very, very special moment. It was the first time in my life, for a longer time, I'm able, as I just said, to welcome my bleed. But it was the first time that I literally yielded into the emergence of my bleeds. And I often heard people talk about waves of love and, right, our uterus, our womb, there is a lot of oxytocin circulating in our body when the womb contracts. It's a very potent hormonal state as well. And I think it has been the first time that I so deeply experienced the potency of that love and warmth and safety. And yeah, that was the start of my big bleeds. And immediately, I said in the beginning, it started to feel so adventurous and somehow also fun, and there was something very also playful starting to wake up in me, because it was just exciting. It was just so exciting. What was the last time when I had almost 3 full days with nothing to do, with literally nothing to do, no single email, no post, no phone call, just nothing. And I felt there was such an excitement and just a joy and gratefulness that already that one evening actually felt to really recharge my battery. And I went to sleep and I woke up, and that was the first moment where I started to meet some challenges. I got up and I noticed that very strong urge to get up and do, get up and get on with things and do something in order to be productive, to not waste time, I very much noticed that urge to identify myself with what I do and how much I did, rather than just with what I feel, what I sense. And in that very first moment, there was a real moment of fear, of feeling uncomfortable. There was a very weird nervousness. There was a sense of nervousness. I couldn't quite explain what was going on, but I felt nervous to do nothing. And there was a little moment I thought, oh, let's just get on with things. I could just cozily take my computer and write on this project or write those emails, or I could still just very cozily read that book in a surrendering way. And I thought, no. No, I've committed to a big bleed and I keep committing to it. And that fear and nervousness somehow settled. And then I met boredom. It was maybe 2 or 3 in the afternoon, and I met a huge wave of boredom, of feeling bored. And that big question, so what do I do now? What do I do? And I was thinking about, I was very much sitting with that question, what excites me today, on this day today, when I don't have anything to do? And that was the moment when, looking back in time, I feel I've really entered my big bleed. And really acknowledge that in that moment where I have nothing to do, that's what excites me, is really sensing body and exploring and living into the question, how centrally alive can I allow myself to be? And in that moment, I remember so well, Lucy Pear's book, The Burning Woman, came into my mind as I was lying in the hammock, and she talks about that space between dreaming and becoming. And I suddenly could so feel that space. It suddenly felt like I found myself in a very, like in an in-between, in a metaphysical layer, soup, ocean, in an interface. I don't know what that space between dreaming and becoming is, but I think I felt to have felt that space. I felt floating somewhere in between dreaming and becoming. And from that moment onwards, I spent my whole big bleed literally lying in the hammock in the garden. It was good weather all the time. And I was just rocking back and forth. I had my hands on my chest, on my belly, on my womb. And I was just sensing my breath, sensing the warmth underneath my hands, sensing the movement, sensing the cramps, sensing, whoa, that wild animal underneath my hands. And I'm going to talk more about that. And in that moment, when I suddenly could let go of that thinking mind, even think about what would excite me, and just drop into sensation, interestingly, that was when also creativity just started pouring out of me. And I had to put lots of white paper onto our kitchen table, and without effort, without thinking, without justifying, I would just from time to time had to get up and kind of vomit, pour out, regurgitate, posset. I'm a pediatric osteopath, you notice. I had to pour out a whole wave of words or sentences, and I didn't obviously analyze and think about it. I just had to, things just poured out of me from that place of just surrendering and sensing. And there was a sense of I was tapping into pulsation of life. There was a lot of images of renewal, rebirth, of shedding, and of course, in that moment, my womb, my uterus is shedding its most intimate layer, its most intimate innerness. And I was lying there with my hands on my womb, and I really it felt to me like I was able to rest into my very essence, into that raw feminine power. And something which really struck me there was, wow, the moment we bleed, if we really give ourselves space and time to surrender to that bleed, to do a big bleed, and to really meet those motions, those cramps, those shedding. I want to say the voice of your womb in that moment. Actually, there aren't that many other moments in our cycle or in our life where we are so close to our organs, to our viscera, to our innerness, where we are so close to the movement deep within. Usually we feel our viscera when we have eaten the wrong thing, when we are diseased, when we are ill. But we women, once a month, there is one author, and I forgot who it is, calls the womb a wild animal within a wild animal. And that is such a potent expression for me. And when you bleed, I could see how that wild animal started to open its wings and do its very unique, weird and wonderful dance. And I was there witnessing it. And that's so touching, powerful and joyful at the same time. Because of course this is a voice which wants to express itself through me and be brought into the world. But that can only happen if we dare to listen. And as I was, really starting to do a big bleed, there was a second wave of a deep and big tiredness hitting me. A very old tiredness. And I actually, every afternoon, I just was drawn into bed and into a big, old, long nap. It almost felt like the more I surrendered, the more I felt the darkness of my womb calling me home. And this felt so good. And I was thinking, what was the last time, Flurina, that you listened to the darkness, the potency of the darkness of your womb calling you home and actually surrendering? How can I thrive if I don't really give space to this tiredness? How could I have neglected that tiredness for so long? I felt so tired. And I thought, oh my, I've just written, I underestimate rest. In between the rests, I went for walks in the forest and over the fields, and that was wonderful. I went bare feet, it was summer, and what I've experienced there was the potency of how great walks, kind of brisk walks, can be also to tap into creativity. As I was walking, I don't know what is happening there. But after I came back from these walks, my hands would just write, and there was ideas about soft rebellion, there was ideas about writing projects, many things. But I think the walks helped me, or were such a support or an entry to enter the flow of rest, because rest doesn't mean to just relax and kind of collapse. Rest doesn't mean to collapse. And walking allowed me to tap into the flow, the movement of rest, right? I was resting, but I wasn't collapsing. A lot of things actually started to move and wake up. lots of things for you to explore too. So yeah, and in that way and in that manner, I spent the 3 days of a big bleed. And now that I'm emerging into my inner spring, I think on some level I felt more fragile and vulnerable, and I can really feel that freshly, newly hatched chicken kind of quality energy, because of course I rested and dived so deep that I allowed my own skin and shell to become very, very thin, which is so potent to lead into the clarity of that very thin shell. But that also means now that I have to give myself time to really find my feet again and to thicken my skin just a little bit. So what were my biggest insights from this big bleed? The power of rest and darkness. And again, I'm quoting Lucy Pierce in her wonderful book, The Burning Woman. And she says so clearly, we need to be in our dark spaces to meet our true power. And now after that big bleed, I so agree, and I sign every word on that chapter. Yes, I felt I really tapped into my true power and even more into my true calling. I feel very much aligned with my true calling at the moment. And let us remember, right? If we are within dark lights or bright light, that does a different thing to our body. Bright light, that means screens, phones, bright, literally electrical light, activates different parts of your brain. The screen activates the neocortex, the adrenals. In other words, it stimulates the fight and flight response in our body, which is not so much the place from where we can really harvest our intuition and instincts. But the dark lights, and with that, candles, the dark of the night, more dimmed light, also the dark light within our bodies, the darkness of our wombs, the very core of our bodies, to allow to actually tap to emerge into that dark light, activates different parts of our brain. It activates the limbic system, these very old parts of the brain, the story brain, and it activates or it feeds what we call rest and digest, there where intuition and instincts lie. And that was such a big teaching. That's why a big bleed. I had no phone, no screen, no computer, lots of candles. It so brings us into the power of our dark spaces and really aligns us with our instincts. And remember, from my experience, that's where the soft rebellion wakes up. And so a big bleed, that was a big teaching, is such a potent moment to birth the power of my dark chamber, to start to open the space and the walls and then keep nurturing that with every cycle. But a big bleed is a good kind of initiatory moment to say, yes, I attend to the dark as much as I do to the lights. I've already mentioned that this power and this joy of welcoming the bleed, that was such a great teaching for me and insight, how powerful that is on that day when I see my temper drop, to say, and today all I do is welcoming my bleed. During these 3 days, I did 2 wonderful practices and meditations, and I will share one of those, or maybe both of those, with you in an upcoming vlog on YouTube, in a blog on YouTube. If you follow me on Instagram or hop onto my newsletter list, you will be updated for that. I did one practice, I will call that now, dropping into my inner temple. It was a meditation I did where I literally visualized and imagined, saw and felt, allowed myself to sink deeper and deeper and deeper, and really saw how does my inner temple look like. And I noticed how that is such an amazing practice to harvest love, warmth, and to really nurture myself. And again, to dwell in those waves of oxytocin. And the other practice which I did was, I did a meditation back to my young self, to Flurina when she was 12 or 13 years old, which was when I had my first bleeds. And you might know, or you might not know, that menarche, the first bleed, is really the ignition of our dreams. I didn't know that at that time, and no one asked me about my dream when I had my menarche. But I've noticed that each time I bleed, it's such a potent moment to meet her again, to drop back and listen to my dream voice and give her a voice, to travel back in time and ask her, what was your dream? What is your dream? I'll share that in a blog. And yeah, again, I felt so happy and excited, fulfilled from doing nothing, and so energized. And I can see how I now enter into the next cycle fulfilled, full of energy, the two ingredients which I know I need to be successful. And because I rested, because I created space, I can also now so much clearer hear and see what it is, what makes me feel alive. So this is why I said a big bleed. To me, I think now, wow, that's the doorway for a successful and fulfilled life. A life where I have enough energy to do what I want to do, and where I hear what it is what I want to do. And that what makes me feel alive is that which fulfills me. Yes. The last sentence I've written was, oh my, I'm on an adventure called doing nothing, harvesting everything. My dear listener, that was my big bleed. And no, a big bleed is not a wellness day. I want to say it's much harder. It needs commitment, and it's so good. And my invitation for you is to emerge into your rest too. Do not underestimate rest. Create more space for rest. Maybe ask yourself as the first step, what is that 1%, either daily, or what is that 1% when I'm on my next bleed, which I could rest more, emerge, surrender more just towards my inner temple. Start with that 1%. And maybe also for you the question, how could you plan ahead to create more space when you bleed? Note it in your diary. Is there something you could cross out, you could cancel? Can you already now create emptiness for a whole day just for yourself? And then observe how that changes the tone of the rest of your cycle. Journal about it. Also notice when you rest and you do a big bleed, what are your toxic productive tendencies you very much struggle to let go of? And how could you turn those volumes down in general so that they have to scream less when you bleed? For me, that definitely was the phone and the screen. And it made me commit from you to stop the screen time 6 p.m. the latest. I'll try. And I would love to hear from you. I would love to hear from you here in the comments or on social media at flurina.tali, or send me an email, softrebellion@flurinatali.com. I very much want this to be a conversation, and share with me, what are your ideas for this? How could we all, what could be this 1% we can emerge into our rest, or create space on every day to emerge into our rest? If you all send me your ideas, I summarize it and I create a emerging restful document, and I'll share it with you all. And a next step for you might be to read the book Wild Power. I link that in the show notes, or listen to a other Big Bleed podcast episode with Red School and the Menstruality podcast. I'll link that as well. Thank you so much for being with me today. And yeah, one more time, I would love to hear from you. I would love to hear your takeaways and how this episode was for you. And you can always find me on social media or send me an email. All of that, as said, in the show notes. Let us journey together and keep exploring what the soft rebellion means to me and to you and to all of us. I will be with you next week with a super exciting guest, and until then, go and be your unique, weird, wonderful self. Lots of love.